I don't think it's a secret, but I really like dinosaurs. If that wasn't clear, hello? I'm Professor Ginkgo, and welcome to my channel. In all honesty, I love dinosaurs as far as I can remember. There is no moment where I can point to where dinosaurs just clicked with me. As long as I've existed, this little stream of consciousness I've had, so has my love for dinosaurs. Also, I really love video games. So my earliest memories are me playing Jak and Daxter on my dad's PS2. So one might think that I enjoy all dinosaur video games, but actually, no, I do not, because they are bad. Now, granted, some dinosaur games end up being really good, but in general, good dinosaur games are few and far between. There are some good games with dinosaurs in it, but not a whole lot of good dinosaur games. Most are niche at best, and a good chunk of them are bad at worst. The Isle has done irreparable damage to dinosaur video games, let me tell you. If I find one more walking simulator, I am going to lose it. There are a few exceptions, of course. Jurassic Park Genesis, Parkosaurus, and, of course, the holy grail of all dinosaur video games, in my opinion, on the Nintendo DS of all systems, a game plagued with shovelware, Fossil Fighters. Now, at first you might see this game and think, wow, this really just looks like it is made to cash in on a little kid's just love of dinosaurs and anything brightly colored and looks cool. And yeah, but man, this game is just something else. Despite the fact that this game looks pretty much like shovelware, this game is just really fun. Even the marketing for this game is really neat. Nintendo actually hosted a hands-on fossil dig at La Brea Tar Pits for kids to play around with, along with early demos of the games to play. Man, I really wish I knew about this when I was a kid, because that would have been so cool to do. And the ads here were pretty neat as well. I remember the first one blew my mind as a kid.
You can excavate and revive your team of Vivosaurs to attain glory at Fossil Stadium. Fossil Fighters, Awaken an Era on Nintendo DS and Nintendo DSi. Rated E for everyone.
I remember wanting this game so bad as a kid, and I only got it a year later after I found it on sale at GameStop. And from that point, my life was just changed forever. A lot of people compare it to Pokemon, and they didn't try it because it's thought nothing more as a Pokemon clone, which, kind of fair, but it really doesn't do the game justice. For starters, catching is more similar to something like Spectrobes, where you can excavate fossils and revive the dinosaurs, which once revived are called Vivosaurs. This game has a distinct aesthetic that I can only describe as Saturday morning anime, kind of like anything you'd find on the Fox block like Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, and of course, Dinosaur King. It has a really goofy anime-ish style to really everything, and it just bleeds into the dialogue, which is very charming and very silly. Character designs are also pretty cool when you look at them. Of course, I'm talking about the official art. They kind of just look like that in the video game. Although, to be fair, the character models aren't the most important thing that they're really focusing on. Instead, they're focusing on the dinosaur models, which all have amazing designs, but we'll talk about those later. The music is also surprisingly good. I use them in most of my videos actually, and they do an amazing job in not just being great tracks, but translating mood to the player. The title screen track does a great job at installing a sense of wonder and awe on the player, having a strong horn section that makes you feel like you're arriving to someplace magical, just ready for an adventure. The overall music matches each location to a T, whether it's the lonely tunes of River Ravine, or the atmospheric slow track of Bottoms Up Bay. The fossil cleaning music is just great. A vaguely jazzy theme making you feel great as you discover each new dinosaur. Also, the battle and boss music just feel epic. They have a theme similar to the Jaws theme, and they just have a sense of strength that's worthy of dinosaurs battling. Speaking of battle, let's just get into the gameplay. It's super cool, and it actually has a good amount of complexity in it. It isn't something as refined as Pokemon was at this point in time, but for the first time, it's very interesting. It's really fun, and I would like to go into the intricacies, and I will. Luckily, I know a game dev that can really get my thoughts out. My friend Aryn Crestguard is a game developer, and he can point out these little nuances that'll just go over my head. Aryn?
Hi, I'm Aryn Crestguard, professional RPG protagonist, and that's the end of the bit. I have no other qualifications. Fossil Fighters was a game I grew up with way back in the day. It was something that was introduced to me by my friends, and I fell in love with it at first sight. I loved the tone and the combat, and I even remember the game offering a pretty solid challenge towards the end. I think I'll leave the reminiscing to Ginkgo, however, and instead offer an analysis of the game's systems and even offer some critique. The primary distinction that Fossil Fighters offers to separate itself from other games in the creature collecting genre is the fossil extraction, a mechanic that allows a very unique take on progression. Instead of finding some unique creatures in the wild and training them, the player is able to build on a single Vivosaur through fossils. The reason this is so distinctful is that it adds a whole new take on progression and helps them develop a very strong game loop. Now, a game loop is very easy to understand. It's the basic order of events that a player takes when playing a game. All games are built on this looping nature, and they're frequently based around resources. In Fossil Fighters, the fossils you dig up are the resources, and they define this loop. Now, the loop goes something like this. You start in town, and there you can do some passive upkeep like upgrading your equipment, cleaning fossils, starting story events, just passive preparation stuff generally. Then you pick an environment to explore, and from there you have two options available. You can spend some time digging up fossils, allowing you to bolster your team or earn money, or you can complete any story events that are there. And these aren't mutually exclusive either. You can switch between the two as much as you want. In fact, the game even encourages you to do this by having fossils show up in the story locations as well as more open areas. After you've had your fill, you return to the town and the game goes on. What's great about this is that it's incredibly simple, and that simplicity allows it to incorporate this loop into the rest of the game. The story is themed around an episodic Saturday morning cartoon where everything resets, for lack of a better word, and brings you back to your room. This is great. Instead of making a story that wants to be this sprawling adventure but instead has to find ways of ham-fisting this associated game loop, Fossil Fighters sidesteps this by just making a story that follows the same loop the gameplay does. On top of the story, the design naturally takes this loop into account as well. Everything in the game is one way or another linked to the core mechanic, that being digging up and cleaning fossils. Now, normally, when you base your entire game around one single mechanic, things tend to fall apart. The reason being that you usually put yourself in a make or break scenario where either the minigame is fun and everything works, or it's awful and brings down the game with it. Thankfully, however, you can tell that a lot of time and effort was put into the fossil cleaning minigame. It's short, frantic, and incredibly addictive. The game offers two simple options, the safe but slow drill versus the risky but effective hammer. This is all we really need. There are no special gimmicks or extra mechanics necessary. All they needed to create this really tight gameplay experience was a simple risk versus reward system under a fast-moving timer. Now I almost feel like I've sinned here because we've been talking about this RPG and I've barely even touched on the combat yet. Thankfully, this is a great time to bring it up, as the fossil system ties into it as well. One of the really distinctive features of Fossil Fighters' Vivosaurs is the new moves that they gain upon getting their different body parts. This works great with the main gameplay loop because it gives you a reason to always be looking out for new fossils. This is a problem that some creature collectors run into, that being that the player will eventually become content with their favorite monsters and then never have a reason to find any new ones. The best example of this problem I can think of is when I was a kid playing Pokemon Platinum. I really liked the water starter Piplup, so I just kept using it in every battle. By the end of the game, I had a level 70 Empoleon, and the rest of my team was still in their 20s, because I only really needed that one Pokemon. In Fossil Fighters, however, even if you have a full team of Vivosaurs you like, chances are you don't have all the pieces yet, meaning that they not only have a bit of a power cap on them, but you also still have a reason to keep digging up fossils and thus be introduced to other Vivosaurs you might want to use. This segues well into the other unique factor in Fossil Fighters combat, the 3-member rotation-based combat. The dynamics between Vivosaurs and their positions add a surprising amount of depth to this silly little game about dinosaurs. It follows a trend that I've noticed in creature collector games, where simple turn-based combat is made more interesting by increasing the number of creatures out at a time. You can see this everywhere from Temtem to disc creatures, but Fossil Fighters takes this to a new level by adding rotation and position-based stats into the mix. This makes team building a fun exercise for the player, but also opens up the doors to some of its bigger problems. This game has some wonky balancing. There are some Vivosaurs that just break this game. Not that you'd be able to tell though, it's a bit of a chore to really understand a potential Vivosaur. In my experience, there are just too many axes involved to determine quality. A single Vivosaur has a base stat pool, a buff-debuff modifier, 3 potential moves with varying degrees of secondary effects to damage, and sometimes a passive ability. This is a good deal of information for me, an adult, to parse, let alone a child. The menu really doesn't do this game any favors either. The only real parsable stat on a Vivosaur is the percentages on its back row effect. Everything else is accompanied by mostly meaningless numbers. This is a problem shared by many other RPGs, but it specifically agitates the issues with this game. The game attempts to help players by giving an explanation of the niches of a Vivosaur in a short snippet. These work in general, but are a little bit inconsistent, sometimes referencing factors that aren't even relevant until you get more body parts for them later in the game. These snippets are also the only place where a Vivosaur's passive ability shows up, which works on paper, but really should be placed in its own spot on a menu so the player can easily understand the parameters of a passive. Most of these problems arise out of mostly just oversights. The game suffers from first game syndrome, where developers likely just didn't think about all the little interactions. They were simply too busy making the game fun to play. Thankfully, the best cure for first game syndrome is a sequel, and a sequel we sure did get.
Thank you, Aryn, for that analysis. It's really nice to have friends who've played this game, considering that sometimes I feel like only 10 people have played it. Since this game is by nature a creature collector, let's start with the creatures. So, in order to free your fossils from these rocky prisons, you have a very, very cool and honestly fun minigame. You do this every time you get a new Vivosaur, and it never gets old. Game's pretty simple. Drill, hammer. 90 seconds to complete, go nuts. The real fun from this side of the game is the higher score you get, the more experience you get for a Vivosaur. You're encouraged to try and beat your personal best. That, combined with the variety in rock shape and hardness, means you have to approach different fossils in a different way, which really just works. Like for most of early game, a lot of fossils are pretty easy. You just tap them with your hammer, they break in a consistent way, and that's pretty much it. But then you go to Bombs of Bay, and then this happens. So yeah, after that you definitely are act a little more cautious around most of these fossil rocks. You'll find that shape and hardness make digging up each fossils a different experience and makes you tackle each rock in a different way. Also, you're incentivized to try and complete your Vivosaur too. There are 4 parts to each Vivosaur, and each one will unlock a move along with it. It's a really good thing this part collecting game is so fun. You feel so accomplished every time you get a personal best, or when you add a new part to Vivosaur. Or you can just be like me and have a team of Vivosaurs with only the weakest move in the game. Don't worry about it. After Revive, our little Vivosaur here, you might notice there's an element system that's kind of like Pokemon, but also not like Pokemon. Instead of it having a lot of different elements with a multiplier system. Instead, there are 5 elements. Fire beats earth, earth beats air beats water, and water beats fire. Neutral just vibes in the corner, eating paint chips. Thematically, each element also has a sort of vibe to it. Fire Vivosaurs tend to look powerful. Water consists of aquatic animals and in general just look pretty elegant. Earth looks tough, air looks speedy, and neutral Scribblows. Element also hints on how they play too. Of course, there's always exceptions to the rules, but in general, fire hits hard, earth is defensive, water has status, air is evasive, and neutral are Scribblows. That's only one part of each Vivosaur. Type of animal the Vivosaur was also affects its stats and overall design. Large theropods do big damage, small raptors are fast with low HP, sauropods have high HP but low speed. The element identity plus family identity means that in general you can figure out a Vivosaur's role in a team before you even start using them. Each Vivosaur is obviously based off of their extinct counterpart, but their flourishes and the dinosaur list shows that whoever was in charge of creature design really knows their stuff. For example, Karkar is based off Carcharodontosaurus, which is named for the shark genus Carcharodon because of the shark-like teeth. So, Karkar has a shark-like face, but that's not all. The dinosaur also has a pharaoh motif because the dinosaur was discovered in modern-day Egypt. There's so many Vivosaurs that show off a knowledge about the cool little trivia bits with each Vivosaur's real-life counterpart. Not to mention that there's a list of dinosaurs filled with both well-known and obscure ones, from iconic T-Rex to really obscure ones like Bradykim. There are really cool Vivosaurs that really introduce some new dinosaurs to someone who might not know. The starter, for example, instead of being something simple like a T-Rex, is instead Altospinax, which is a dinosaur that young Ginkgo had no clue existed. It was in none of my books, and that was something that just blew my mind. So, we built our team, we can go to battle, and we can see how it goes. Combat is a little different from something like Pokemon. First of all, each turn you gain FP, which is mana you'll use to spend your attacks. Obviously, you spend it to attack, but you can get a large burst of FP if one of your Vivosaurs are taken out, which is a pretty cool comeback mechanic. If you don't have a Vivosaur that can leech FP, a fight can very easily swing to the other direction if you're not accounting for the fact that your opponent's Vivosaurs will hit you really hard. Second, it's not your straightforward turn-based RPG. You can see it has a grid-based system. Aryn touched upon it earlier, but to recap, there's the backline. Vivosaurs apply stat bonuses or penalties to either side. In addition, attacking in or out of the backline does less damage usually, which helps to keep your squishy buffers alive. The front line is where the buffs from both sides are added and applied, and your front line should in general be your main attacker, unless there's enemy comso. If you get statused, you can rotate out of there, pushing one of your Vivosaurs to the front and full resetting everything, including buffs and debuffs, for one turn. This gives an interesting dynamic to building your team. You can make a team of all-rounders that can tag in and out as needed, a team focusing on buffing one heavy hitter as much as possible, or just put comps on your team, because this game is not super balanced. Minus 90% to both attack and defense is insane. Jokes aside, the combat, although fairly exploitable, is just really fun. The combat is pretty simple, but the main fun of the game is trying out different combos of Vivosaurs to synergize and deal with any situation you can come across. It also helps that the level cap of this game, capping at only level 12. If you fully max out a Vivosaur's part at 100%, that Vivosaur will gain 2 levels. This means that if you do really well, you're normally around 4 levels away from level cap, which is very useful for bringing in new Vivosaurs that you just found. Overall, this game is really amazing. It's nostalgic for me too. It's a shame that there aren't a lot of people who played it, because this game is so important not only to me, but for others. My first time I actually showed up online was when I jumped online to talk to someone about Fossil Fighters. I went on the Fossil Fighters wiki on the Tiny Chat. I just really wanted someone to talk to about this amazing underrated DS game. And that kind of dates me there. I made a lot of good friends back then, some that I still talk to from time to time nowadays. It sounds kind of weird talking about this funny little DS game that honestly no one heard of, but I literally would not be the same person I am today if I didn't play this cute game. Based on experience, I don't think I'm alone. Everyone who's played this game has a similar experience. If you mention the words Fossil and Fighters in close succession, you will gain an instant friend if you're talking around a fan. That includes me, by the way. If you mention Fossil Fighters around me, you're probably going to be my friend. That is a threat. Honestly, you just owe it to yourself to play this amazing game. And I hope this half review, half gush just convince you to check it out. I didn't even go over the story, which just has to be experienced to believe, but it is absurd in the best Saturday morning cartoon way. It involves just time travel, weird god dinosaurs. It is amazing in the weirdest way possible. This game can't be felt anywhere else, and it gives you that little box, as I mentioned, vibe that you really don't find nowadays. And in my opinion, this is the second best game for the Nintendo DS. But the best game for the Nintendo DS, well, that's a story for another time.